everyone, and welcome to the Cultureshock podcast, where we talk about things that shock the culture forever. Today, finally, I'm doing the long-been-waiting two-part Y2K episodes. On this episode, I'm going to be talking about the Y2K movement as a whole, how it got started, and how it impacted the culture forever. And on next week's episode, I'm going to be talking about the alternative to Y2K, which was the revolt of the Attitude Era. So let's go ahead and get started. Y2K currently is regarded as one of the most influential moments in music, fashion, and culture. But what some people don't know is that before it was a mecca for creativity and expression, it was started as a computer bug and a public scare. So up until this point, the internet was still being evolved and was still pretty new. So we did not have the technology to adapt to the new millennium, and people were afraid that now that everything is starting to become the norm with technology and we have adapted everything that we do onto the internet, and a lot of things are moved through the internet now, that once we have to reset everything to 00 for 2000, that everything will think that we're going back to 00 as in year zero, and will not know how to adapt. And it was a really big movement. It still is regarded as one of the biggest public scares to this date, and people genuinely thought that their lives in the stock market and every single forms of public transport to even businesses and local things, even such as news stations and households, were in fear that they would have to be reset and have to readapt the way that they live. But the computer bug had very little to do with the pop culture movement of Y2K that we've grown to learn and love. That was more to do with optimism and futurism for the new millennium coming into the year 2000. Which people frequently misunderstand. They think that the Y2K movement was the 2000s movement. No, it was from years 1995 till 2001. It was about the year 2000 and a lot less about the 2000s overall. Let's talk about the aesthetic itself. So a lot of the Y2K aesthetic revolved around what people wanted and could see the future to be like. People thought that the year 2000 and the new millennium was a very different concept to what we were going to live through in the past. They thought it was going to be a lot of technology filled, very colorful, very futuristic, very much something that was lived in a dream, and the ideal version of the future people thought was what we were going to live through. And that was very obvious a lot through things like fashion, movies, and music videos. Probably the biggest part of this aesthetic was the visuals that went along with it. So if y'all want a little bit of more information about what I'm talking about, y'all can visit Institute for Y2K Aesthetics or check me out on my Instagram. I'll be posting some of the visuals that go along with this podcast episode. But this was probably one of the biggest things of this movement, with a lot of its inspiration coming from chrome and smoothed out edges, a lot of things that were not necessarily accepted in the past, but really going around this idea of technology and what you are seeing is something that you have never seen before, almost in a dystopian way, but almost in a positive take on dystopian. And where this really comes into play visually is in the 1999 movie The Matrix. And The Matrix is filled with Y2K messaging, aesthetics, and visuals. So much that it inspired a whole fashion line and high fashion shows. The biggest examples of this is the Christian Dior 1999 fashion show, where several models walked out with outfits directly inspired by the outfits that were worn in the movies, almost having a callback to the way of Y2K and really pushing that to be the aesthetic outside of the movie industry and making it the aesthetic of modern fashion, especially weird, high-class, modern fashion. And Y2K was just not a phenomenon in America. It was a global phenomenon. It really peaked in America, but also was just as big around the world, especially in Europe, where it made its own genre of music called Eurodance. Eurodance was one of the most popular EDM genres ever made. It blended elements of trance music along with techno in a way that really encapsulated the feel of Y2K. It was very technology based, obviously, because it was EDM, electronic dance music, but it took the technology element to a whole new level. You could feel that it was made by technology. You could hear the computer elements, which was something that was kind of a no-go in music up to this point. People wanted music to feel natural, especially dance music wanted to be felt like it was made by instruments. But this rise of Eurodance really pushes, hey, we're accepting technology into this new millennium, and this became the future of EDM up until this point, even now in 2025. Still is that very hard technological sound, started through late 90s, early 2000s Eurodance. And along with rave music from Europe becoming popular, also European fashion was also starting to become popular in America. But what was rising in America was more of the rave European wear. A lot of the sunglasses during night, a lot of the chrome outfits really got their start in the Eurodance Y2K scene. And along with the music, what also became super prevalent in this moment was the fashion being dictated in American music videos as well. This was very big throughout most of the music videos at this time, especially in the hip-hop world. But where it was really big was in two big music videos that shaped this era. That being Oops, I Did It Again by Britney Spears and No Scrubs by TLC. The shiny cat bodysuits became a really big idea, especially from this music video, that people were starting to mimic it in real life. A lot of award show outfits, a lot of streetwear became this idea of taking these bodysuits that were popularized in these music videos and making them into modern day outfits. As most trends that rise, it has to fall eventually. So what happened? What stopped the optimism and futurism of the new millennium that was brought up by Y2K? First things first, the computer bug didn't end up even happening. It ended up being just the computers were able to adapt themselves, and it just started over saying 2000 instead of just saying 0. So everything was fine, nothing ended up happening, nothing ended up ending, obviously. So the first public scare element of it just ended working itself out, so everyone started to just calm down into themselves. But the bigger thing and the more sad fact was, once we hit the millennium, the world was hit with a lot of times of trouble. There was a lot of times of uncertainty when it came to war and nation relations. The 9/11 terrorist attacks happened in 2001 that really shut the world itself down. So this optimism that was going into the new millennium shortly got almost annihilated just by the real world hitting everyone. Which is a shame, because this really was a beautiful aesthetic and really gave people the hope for the world. But when it did not meet expectations, this hope for futurism and making the world that we want to see kind of just died down, especially when it came to culture in America itself. But where it did strive for a little bit longer was in Europe. With them not being so affected by 9/11, they were able to prosper with the Y2K aesthetic up until about the mid-2000s. But it is getting a rise very much recently in the past couple years where people are starting to adapt this aesthetic into a modern lens. They are blending early 2000s elements with mid-2000s elements and kind of grouping the idea of Y2K in the 2000s, but the love for this aesthetic still carries on to this day, which really gets me wondering what would happen if we continue that optimism into this day. So this has been the Y2K episode. Thank y'all so much for listening. For more information on this episode or any episodes themselves, you can check it out on my Instagram at _Cultureshock podcast, where I give a little bit more information, give the opportunity to vote on episodes, and for y'all to give feedback directly on how the podcast is going. Once again, thank y'all so much for listening, and this has been the Cultureshock podcast.